Inside California's Folsom State Prison, one of the most feared correctional facilities in America, violence isn't random. It's organized, calculated, controlled. For decades, prison gangs have acted like hidden governments, dictating everything from who lives to who dies. Today we're pulling back the steel curtain to reveal how these organizations run the show from the shadows, sometimes with more structure than the outside world. This is the story authorities never want told. If you walked into Folsom Prison for the first time, you might think the correctional officers run everything. They hold the keys, they carry the radios, and they stand on the tiers watching every movement. But the moment the gates slam behind you, a reality hits harder than the sound of steel on steel. The inmates, not the guards, set the rules. Folsom, one of California's oldest prisons, opened in 1880. Its gray granite walls were designed to intimidate. But over time, those walls didn't just keep people in, they trapped a system that inmates learned to manipulate, reshape, and ultimately dominate. By the late 20th century, Folsom had become a micronation of rival groups, political alliances, and underworld economies. Every inmate belonged to a side, whether they wanted to or not. At the center of this structure were the California prison gangs, not street crews, not neighborhood cliques, but highly organized criminal syndicates regarded by law enforcement as some of the most structured in the world. The Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Black Guerrilla Family each held their own territory and hierarchy. Inside Folsom, these groups didn't just survive, they evolved into institutions. And the first rule new inmates learned was simple. You don't choose a gang. Your gang chooses you. The moment a prisoner entered a housing unit, their race determined where they went, who they talked to, who they ate with, and who would protect them or target them. This wasn't based on preference or ideology. It was survival. Race-based politics became mandatory because the gangs enforced them with an iron grip. Corrections officers reported that even mundane daily routines, sitting at a table, using a workout area, standing in line for chow, were regulated by the gangs as strictly as military protocol. A black inmate sitting in a Mexican Mafia area could ignite an instant conflict. A white inmate borrowing a pair of shoes from a member of the Black Guerrilla family could trigger a debt the entire racial group would demand repayment for. The guards understood this dynamic better than anyone. Many later admitted that without the gangs enforcing these invisible rules, Folsom would descend into uncontrollable chaos. As dangerous as these organizations were, they also acted as a brutal form of internal government. If an inmate disrespected the program, if they caused problems, if they created instability, their own group would deal with them long before staff ever got involved. Former correctional officer accounts describe gang leadership inside Folsom operating more like CEOs than criminals. Key decisions, drug distribution, debt collection, political alliances, even disciplinary actions, were decided at the top and communicated through carefully coded messages, known as kites, and through the prison's most reliable communication network, inmate workers. Porters, kitchen staff, laundry workers. These weren't random jobs. They were strategically used positions. A porter sweeping a hallway could deliver 3 messages on a single pass. A laundry worker could hide a coded note inside a folded uniform and move it into another building without raising suspicion. Even the prison phones, monitored, restricted, and logged, became tools for gang commanders to send orders outside prison walls. By the 1980s and 90s, some investigators estimated that California prison gangs had more influence inside than most cartels had on the streets. Folsom, with its aging infrastructure and overcrowded yards, became the perfect breeding ground for this underground authority. And yet, despite decades of media depictions, these gangs weren't chaotic mobs swinging weapons at anyone in sight. They were disciplined, intelligent, and incredibly patient. Violence wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. Killings were planned months in advance. Smuggled weapons, known as shanks, were crafted to exact specifications. And assaults were scheduled during times the yard would be full to minimize staff visibility. Every major act of violence had a purpose: to enforce discipline, eliminate rivals, or send a message. To truly understand how prison gangs run Folsom, you have to understand one more truth, one that surprises almost everyone. Many of the most powerful gang leaders rarely touch a weapon themselves. Their influence is so absolute that a single whispered order can move men on opposite ends of the prison into action. Some have commanded networks that reach out to dozens of facilities across the state. Folsom may be surrounded by walls and razor wire, but once you're inside, you enter a different world. One where invisible power structures guide every step, every glance, every word. And in this world, the gangs are the real government. Folsom Prison's main yard might look, from above, like a simple concrete field. Just men walking laps, lifting weights, and talking in tight circles. But anyone who's ever stepped foot on that ground knows the truth. This is a political arena, a marketplace, and a battlefield, all happening at the same time under the surface. Correctional officers often say they can feel the shift in energy before violence erupts. But long before guards sense it, the inmates already know. That's because inside Folsom, the yard isn't just open time. It's where every gang gets evaluated, tested, monitored, and judged. This is where power is displayed and enforced. When the yard opens, inmates flood out like water, but they never mix randomly. Each racial group has its designated areas, carved out decades earlier, never questioned, never changed. The Mexican Mafia's associates might occupy the pull-up bars or benches near the south fence. Nuestra Familia affiliates cluster in tight circles, always watching, always analyzing. White inmates loyal to the Aryan Brotherhood post up near the weights or tables on the west end. The black guerrilla family maintains their own territory, strategic, visible, and heavily defended. These spots aren't preferences. They're political boundaries. And crossing one without permission isn't a mistake, it's a declaration. In the 1990s, former correctional officers recalled moments when new inmates, fresh off the bus, unaware of the politics, would sit down at the wrong table. They'd last maybe 20 seconds before an older inmate stood behind them and quietly said, "Get up. Now." If the warning wasn't taken seriously, the newcomer would be removed, forcefully. No shouting. No theatrics. Just efficient, controlled violence carried out quickly before a guard even noticed. Because to the gangs, allowing a breach of discipline, even a small one, risked unraveling the entire order. One of the most fascinating aspects of yard politics is the routine. Every gang has men whose only job is to observe. They watch who owes money, who's using drugs, who's breaking rules, who's acting nervous, who might be talking to a CO too much. These lookouts aren't just passive watchers, they are intelligence agents. Prison investigators later said that the level of surveillance inmates maintain over each other rivals what some law enforcement agencies do on the outside. But surveillance is only the beginning. The real power lies in communication. Because Folsom is an old prison, it has blind spots, architectural quirks where the gangs learn to slip messages past the guards. A simple glance, a tap on the shoulder, a hand signal across the yard, all of it has meaning. Entire plans can be transmitted without a single word spoken. And then there are the kites, small pieces of paper carrying big decisions. A kite might contain a name, a debt, an order to punish someone, or instructions for a green light, the most feared command in the prison system. A green light means full assault authorization. No hesitation. No questions. No mercy. These kites move like contraband currency. One inmate might slide it into a shoe. Another hides it in a waistband. Another places it inside a trash can that an inmate porter empties during shift changes. In a place where officers watch everything, the inmates have still built a covert communication network so effective that entire wars can be planned without a single intercepted note. But perhaps the most astonishing thing, sometimes the gangs work together. The idea that prison gangs occasionally cooperate seems impossible, considering their violent histories. But inside Folsom, maintaining order benefits everyone. Too much chaos brings heat from the administration. Lockdowns, searches, cell extractions, visiting restrictions. None of the gangs want that. So they created a ruthless but functional political structure. A balance of power. Former inmates call it the program. The program dictates that each group keeps its members in line. If one inmate creates problems, owing money, causing fights, disrespecting staff, their own gang handles discipline before another group gets involved. Punishments vary. It might be a warning, a beating, or in extreme cases removal from the yard, permanently. This internal regulation means that many conflicts never reach the surface. They're resolved in cells and showers in the corners of the yard where cameras don't reach. As long as the program is respected, peace, however brutal, can exist. But when the program breaks, when one group violates an agreement or refuses to check one of their own, that's when Folsom explodes. Investigators recall a moment in the mid-2000s when a single unpaid drug debt spiraled into a racial war. One group demanded action, the other hesitated. The failure to follow the program was interpreted as weakness. Within days, alliances shifted, weapons were made, and the yard became a powder keg. When the violence finally erupted, officers said it happened with military precision, multiple coordinated attacks in different parts of the yard at the exact same moment. It took seconds to begin, and hours to end. This wasn't chaos. It was calculated. And this is how prison gangs maintain power, not through constant violence but through the threat of violence, the knowledge that they can mobilize at any moment. To an outsider, the yard looks like a place where men exercise and talk. To the gangs, it's a chessboard. Every move has consequences. Every step is monitored. Every interaction is part of a larger structure. Folsom may have a warden, a chain of command, and a badge-backed authority. But on the yard? The gangs are the silent government, running their own version of law, order, and war. When you see the yard through that lens, you start to understand something chilling. The guards control the gates, but the gangs control the world inside. It might sound strange. After all, no one inside Folsom Prison earns much. Inmates make cents per hour working in laundry or kitchen jobs. They can't legally hold cash, most possessions are restricted, and nearly everything is monitored. And yet, behind those granite walls, there is an underground economy so sophisticated, so profitable, and so deeply rooted that law enforcement has spent decades trying, and failing, to shut it down. Because gangs don't just maintain power with force. They maintain it with commerce. The prison black market, more organized than you think. Inside Folsom, everything has value. Food, stamps, razors, painkillers, phone time, protection. And the gangs run the supply chain. By the 1990s, officers noticed a pattern. Every major smuggling case led back to one of the four dominant prison gangs. They controlled the routes, the pricing, and the distribution. Not because every gang member was involved, but because the leadership created systems that operated like businesses. Former inmates and investigators have described the same model over and over. Step 1. Get product inside. Contraband gets smuggled in through every method imaginable. Corrupt staff is the most reliable route. Officers or civilian employees paid thousands to bring in cell phones, drugs, tobacco, or tools. But other methods are used too: visitors, mail, even drones in more recent years. And because Folsom is an older prison with multiple blind spots, determined gangs always found ways to exploit them. Step 2. Hide it securely. Folsom inmates perfected what they call stash points, places staff overlooked during searches. Vent ducts, hollowed-out bricks, bolted-down furniture. Even areas inside the plumbing where small bags can survive water pressure. A successful stash can supply an entire gang for months. Step 3. Let the economy flourish. Once contraband enters the system, the gangs distribute it through a layered network. Associates handle sales. Runners collect debts. Enforcers ensure no one steals, cheats, or freeloads. Every transaction, every favor, every debt increases the gang's leverage. The most important currency isn't drugs or money. It's debt. Debts are the backbone of prison power. A single fronted gram of meth in 2005 might cost $50 on the streets, but inside Folsom, could go for $500 worth of store goods or favors. And when you owe a gang money, you don't simply pay it back. You join their web. Maybe you're asked to deliver a message. Maybe you're told to stab someone who disrupted the program. Maybe you're forced to smuggle something through your job assignment. The gangs don't need to recruit by force. Debt recruits for them. Officers who worked at Folsom during the height of this economy said the drug and extortion operations inside were so lucrative that gang leaders often lived more comfortably behind bars than their members did on the streets. With outside associates sending money, girlfriends depositing funds, and corrupt employees smuggling in goods, a high-ranking inmate could earn thousands per week. But the financial empire doesn't stop at prison walls. The connection between inside and outside. One of the most shocking discoveries for law enforcement was that prison gangs, especially the Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brotherhood, had the ability to control street operations from inside Folsom. Phone calls, coded letters, conversations during visitation. Every method became a command channel for these syndicates. The orders flowed outward. Collect taxes from drug dealers. Punish a rival on the street. Move product through a new pipeline. Fund commissary accounts for loyal inmates. Protect family members. Silence witnesses. Investigators described these networks as shadow governments, capable of influencing entire neighborhoods, cities, and criminal networks outside of prison. One officer put it simply: you can lock up the man, but you can't lock up his reach. The business of peace, the business of war. What's even more surprising is the gang's willingness to negotiate. Inside Folsom, peace isn't free. It's negotiated through economic power. If a group wants drugs moved through their yard section, they pay a percentage to the dominant gang. If they want protection for a member, there's a fee. If they want a debt forgiven, they can trade commissary, contraband, or manpower. It's extortion, yes, but it's also politics. Every peace treaty is backed by mutual financial interest. Every war is funded by the economy. Every alliance is strengthened by shared profit. One former inmate said, "Violence gets you power. Money lets you keep it." And over the decades, that system became so entrenched that even major crackdowns, mass transfers, isolation units, heavy monitoring, couldn't stop it. You can relocate a gang leader, but you can't relocate an economy that's built into the foundation of the prison itself. The cost of doing business. Of course, every economy has casualties. When an inmate fails to pay a debt, it's not just a personal issue, it's a political violation. It signals disrespect to the gang, threatens their authority, and risks igniting conflict. To prevent that, punishments are swift and brutal. Officials documented countless cases where someone who owed $50 worth of tobacco ended up stabbed multiple times. Or someone who refused to act as a mule was assaulted in the showers. Or someone who stole commissary from the wrong cell never returned from the yard. Gang leadership doesn't need to do these acts themselves. The economy is self-enforcing. The consequences maintain the system. And that system is what allows gangs to run the show, even when the prison administration believes they're in control. By the time you understand the financial machine operating beneath the surface, you begin to see Folsom not as a prison, but as a city. A city with its own laws, currency, government, and rulers. And those rulers? They sit behind steel bars holding more influence than many people will ever know. Inside Folsom Prison, nothing is random. Every alliance, every rule, every moment of calm, and every explosion of violence is part of a hidden system built over decades. A system where gangs run politics, control commerce, and enforce order more effectively and more ruthlessly than any official authority ever could. This world doesn't exist in shadows because it's secret. It exists in shadows because most people never look closely enough to see it. But now you've seen it. And in the chapters to come, we'll dive even deeper into how these organizations shape life on the inside and far beyond the prison walls.